to grow and listen and learn. And so what we're going to do, we're going to talk about what we're doing, and I'm encouraged and looking forward to also hearing what others are doing in this same space. So with that, I'm going to jump into the first slide. Just a brief introduction about who we are. And the reason we left this slide in here is that we're an organization much like many of your organizations. So our district, I'm sure, is very similar to yours or your Parks Department. Little bit of an overview of what we do. Cosumnes Community Services District is in South Sacramento County. Our district encompasses 157 square miles. We serve an estimated population of 205,000 residents. We deliver services that include parks and recreation. We do have emergency medical services, ambulance transport services, fire suppression, and prevention. Our district is governed by a 5-member board that are elected by district or by division. In total, we have about $131 million operating budget and about $115 million CIP. And just at peak, we're about 800 employees. So this work for us has been somewhat fascinating in that as an organization that provides both parks, recreation, and public safety, we've had to approach some of our DEI work from many different entry points. And today we're going to share with you some of our district work. A lot of this work primarily has started and continued within the Parks and Recreation Department, although there's great work underway in the fire department here as well. So throughout the course today, we like to start at Cosumnes by acknowledging that we're going to lean into the work. And we start all of our conversations from a place of acknowledging that systemic barriers do exist for members of our community, and that many of those systems, processes, and procedures have been created and perpetuated either intentionally or unintentionally by agencies and governments such as ours. And so from that position, we have an obligation to address and remove those barriers. So as we move through the conversation today, what you can expect is we're not going to talk about whether or not those barriers are real, because we acknowledge that they are. We're gonna have this conversation from a place of what we need to do in order to create justice in our programming and equity in our process, policies, and systems. And so as we move through that, think about what impact can you have within your role within your organization? What is your agency role in equity and inclusion? Do you have equity goals? Are they stated? Are they specific? Have you used data to support your position? Have you used data to create more equity in the work that you're doing? Do you understand the historical, local, regional, national, and international context of the work and the need for the work to take place in your community? Have you engaged those stakeholders, and have you developed those strategies and stated what your desired outcomes are as a process of your equity plan?
So one of the first things we wanted to look at as we started this was kind of, what was our why behind it? So I'm going to give Josh a lot of credit. When Josh first got here many, many years ago, he brought a new lens to some of the work that we kind of already started. So in doing so, we wanted to really go out and see, do our hiring practices, do they reflect, how diverse our community is? So I think kind of last time I checked at the time, our community were 7th in the state, and I think like 12th or 15th in the US as it relates to diversity by population. So we want to really examine, kind of where that was at, if we were off, why we were off. Josh just talked about, collecting the data, kind of starting that. In our community, there was kind of also like a budding issue with various municipal governments. So we wanted to make sure that we were doing our due diligence to make sure we were reaching out and doing things that we needed to be doing as we consider like an industry leader.
Okay, I'm sure this is a familiar image for folks on the call. Often used to demonstrate the differences between being equal and being equitable. As we move through some of the equity roadmap, and I know we call it equity roadmap, but really what we're trying to create is an equity roadmap to really achieving justice. And so I like this image because it pushes us to think about justice. I know there's a lot of other images out there that express the same differences. I think for us, it's just kind of a starting point. We're going to talk today about equity and justice. We're not going to be talking about equality as we move through this work. But the idea here is that you can either compensate for the inequity or you can remove the inequity. And so we're really going to focus our efforts in our equity roadmap on really removing the equity and creating, or the inequity, pardon me, and creating justice. So 5 steps in developing your equity roadmap. We're going to cover each of these in some detail. First is understanding context. The second is how you get started. The third is putting that work into your policy and your practices. We're going to give you concrete examples of all of those items, seeing your work in action internally and what that leads to, and seeing that work in action externally.
So one of the first things we want to start with, and I think this was crucial for us, and that's just getting the right people. In order to kind of make this work happen, especially within your organization, we just need the right people to be involved and the right people to be invested. So when we first started doing this work years ago with what was termed our executive staff, we realized that we talked about having the uncomfortable conversations that, when we talked there, and furthermore, when we talked with staff, that, hey, everyone's going to need to start getting comfortable with having a lot of these uncomfortable conversations. I think the next thing that we looked at is, we looked at this more as like initiatives and objectives, and, not by a task. I'm sure, and I'll be honest, like the organization that I work for, we used to do this where we had stuff that we would call like task-based. It would be a task that was on our to-do list. We almost did it for the sake of doing it. Then we could check it off and say, yep, we've done that. In this work, we wanted to go further. This is an ongoing process that Josh talked about in the beginning, where we want to continually improve. We want to continue to be better. We didn't want to have like, okay, success is going to be when we have X number of this and Y number of this and Z number of this. Yep, now we're done doing our DEI work, right? And I also think it's important to understand that a lot of this work that we've been doing and the roadmap that we've created that we're trying to share, this didn't happen overnight. This was done with years of work, years of conversations. We talked about doing our research. We brought in trainers. Personally, we've had to unpack a lot of biases and see, like, in a deep dive into our own, like, where are we not doing well, right? What do we need to really change? And that takes, I think, a lot of really good leadership from our standpoint in our district to say, like, all right, we're not doing really good at this, so this needs to change. Next, as we talk about the understanding of context, we look at right now is a lot of the things that are going on in the world, right? We could talk about the historical context. I think it's very interesting as we look at just, Elk Grove in particular. I don't know if any of you would remember or have heard, it was a few years ago, the Snapchat video of kind of a racial rant of a high school student, but within 4 days it had 4 million views, right? So in our aspect of like looking at this and understanding the context, this was kind of right around the same time that articles were coming out about, the Elk Grove Unified's, racial achievement gap in math. And then, since then, we can talk about George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. So there's all of these things, occurring in society. We've talked about being uncomfortable or being comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. We also realize, like, to understand this context, that when people come to work, this has to be a place where we can start to unpack and discuss a lot of these things, right? Like the student at that school, we have a lot of part-time staff that go to that school or went to that school, we're unfortunate that a lot of our part-time staff, very diverse, had different thoughts and feelings about everything that was going on in the world over these last couple of years. And we wanted them to know that, hey, coming to work, like, we're going to talk about some of these things if you want to talk about this. Like, this is going to be a safe environment for us to really have these real conversations about what this means, how you're feeling. You know, we didn't want to have it where, hey, this is what you're seeing and hearing in the news. But when you come to work, thanks for wearing your staff uniform. Now, you know, go out and serve this community. So for us, that was one of the really big things that we've done well.
So once you have a grasp of understanding the context that's happening in your community and what your community needs may be, here are some strategies in that first step, or second step rather, of getting started. The first is there's a ton of professional networks and networking opportunities, some through CPRS, CSDA. This one that we've pulled up here on the screen for you is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. We joined the Government Alliance on Race and Equity a number of years ago. It has been an awesome opportunity for us to network with other regional and municipal governments right here in Northern California, and working in cohorts and hearing what others are doing in this space. We've also started a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee to assist championing some of the work that GARE has called government agencies to do. And in that case, we started small, and we've been growing that group of champions, some of which are in management, some of which are on frontline staff. But again, cross-section of the organization, folks that are passionate about the work, and as Mike indicated, folks that are engaging with us and moving our organization forward. And then from there, thinking about what are the other stakeholders that need to be or should be engaged. And so we actually held some meetings where I reached out to some of our community members, a number of us on the executive team, joined the NAACP and worked with leadership there in the Sacramento area to come together, and we asked questions. We were vulnerable to, how are our spaces, and are we engaging everyone in the community, and does the community feel like our spaces are safe places for them? Do they feel like they belong here? So thinking about who are we serving, but also who are we not serving, and who should we be serving? The next thing that we did internally was we held a survey, and you'll see some of these questions here. This is a workplace culture survey. It was meant to elicit responses from employees from across the organization. But you can see here we've asked questions, yes or no. Senior management recognizes employee efforts to foster a culture of inclusion. Another example, yes or no. I try to hide some aspects of my diversity and what I perceive as its stereotypes in the workplace. So you can see these questions are meant to really elicit some honest dialogue. And we were able to take this survey data and compare it against the demographics of our workforce community to really identify if there were certain ages, genders, ethnicities that felt like there were disproportionate responses, right? So in some cases, we're able to see if one group of employees all felt like the organization was promoting diversity while another group felt like it wasn't, it gave us an opportunity to pause and reflect and think, okay, what are we doing in this space to make sure that these opportunities are available to everyone? The next thing we did in our getting started was we looked at our demographic data across the organization. And so we looked at both our service area and within our district, we looked at our total employees. We looked at our 3 departments in administration, fire, and parks and recreation. And, the other piece that I want to call out here in this data, your HR department has, I'm sure has this data, but we took this a step further, and we not only looked at the demographic information, but we then looked at the salary overlays. We then looked at, the racial, ethnic, gender, and age of our top and bottom earners to try to identify, so 1, are we reflecting the community? And 2, do we have equity within, every layer and level of our management? And where, and in this process, we decided and we found that there was some additional work to do. Obviously as a public safety agency, you can see the fire number there, which leans very white and has a large number of declines. There's a lot of national data out there that would suggest that those declines are typically white. And so for us to think about, okay, how do we diversify our workforce in such a way to better match the needs of our community. But when you add the salaries of our top earners in that department and lay that against the demographic data of our community, we had some deep additional work to do there. And so, which has spurred a lot of great conversations for us in our equity roadmap and our equity planning for our fire department. You can see that our Parks and Recreation department is close to our district resident as a community, but we still have some work to do there as well. And you can actually start to really see individual communities that are underrepresented within our staffing ranks. And so this was another tool that we used in that getting started phase. And then from there, we look to develop an equity statement. So we use focus groups of employees as well as community stakeholder meetings held between senior managers and members of our community that to articulate an equity statement. And that this statement was made an organizational policy right along our mission and vision. If you go out to our website, you'll be able to find our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion right on our webpage, right in the policy immediately following our mission and vision statement. This was big for us, and the board approved this as our equity statement. Staff had a lot of process and buy-in here, and essentially the statement has 4 parts. And I'm pretty proud of the work that the focus groups were able to do to refine these. And you're going to see how these statements then influenced the rest of the work internally and externally. So the first item here focuses on ensuring equity and inclusion in recruitments and hiring, which is the easiest. When we talk about engaging or beginning DEI work, oftentimes we go immediately to recruitments and what we do in hiring. And that's not a bad place to start, but it's not the only place to start. And so we wanted to recognize that what we do to ensure equity and inclusion in our recruitments and hiring was important, but it wasn't going to be the only thing we're doing. And so number 2 talks about promoting a climate that's welcoming and conducive to the success of all our employees. And so if we're going to go through a lot of work and energy and thinking about who we're not reaching and doing good outreach in our recruitment process, when we bring people into our organization, we want to make sure that we have a workplace culture that is that matches our values around inclusion, equity, our cultural awareness. And you know, this has been training has been a component of this. As we move forward, you'll see that. But some of it is just changing culture and shifting culture, and that does take some time. We've had some pretty good early wins, and this is where that journey continues for us. The third item here is around developing and supporting policies and procedures that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so for us, you know, in recognizing as a government agency, again, that we are perpetuating some of these systemic barriers, we want to make sure that we're not creating policies that conflict with our values around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're actually in the process of reevaluating all of our policies. On a future slide here, you're going to see we updated specific policies early, like our harassment and retaliation in the workplace and workplace violence policies. We made sure to include things like domestic violence leave and really thinking about all of the needs of all of our employees in that process. But you're going to, overall, we're revamping and rewriting over 160 district policies with a look at both just a regular update, but also with an equity lens as we move through that process. And then the last item here is the one I think as an organizational leader, I'm most proud of. It is the commitment that we're going to provide equitable access to our district services, events, and activities that further develop diversity and inclusion in our community. And that last little bit of that 4th statement is really important, and it was really important to the staff that worked on this. And that's to say, as an organization, especially as government, 3 years ago, hate crimes would happen in our community, and as a government organization, we would do as so many government organizations do, and we would do nothing. We wouldn't acknowledge that hate and that pain was created. We wouldn't acknowledge that it impacts our employees. We wouldn't acknowledge that it impacts our community, our patrons, our residents. And so what this 4th statement does is it enables and empowers staff to say, we're going to have a position. As an organization that's community focused and community service oriented, we're going to have a position when those things occur in our community. And we're going to use our position as a government agency to be a leader in educating other members of our community exactly what that means and how we move forward together.
So the first thing we want to look at, as kind of Josh really started talking about, was our policy development. So I'm going to go a little out of order here, and I'm going to start with, our hiring policy. So Josh talked about in the first slide, usually when we talk, diversity, equity, inclusion, what does all that mean? We look specifically to what are your hiring practices or what are your hiring procedures? And one of the things we implemented years ago was the bias awareness training. And what that is, we're coming into the people that are on the panel are going to go through, I think it's somewhere about 45 minutes of bias awareness training. And we talk about, implicit, explicit bias. Are you aware that you're biased over this? And maybe you have a preference to, oh, I like to hire people that look like me. I like to hire people that have the same background as me, or, are you unaware of some of your biases? It even talks about stuff like, recency bias, like, oh, like I really like that last candidate because fresh in our minds, right? So we looked at a lot of those things. We looked at, behaviorally based responses. So, we looked at, how do you, examples of like, if you have this conversation going on between coworkers, students, colleagues, that's clearly offensive, how would you handle that? We also wanted to look at, I guess this is more of a competency and not just, as we kind of say, like, for lack of a better term, the token question in there, like, okay, tell me about your diversity, equity, inclusion experience. And then someone can easily answer that question. We want to hear throughout the course of you talking, throughout the course of this interview, what does it sound like? Are you talking about how, during your time, are you talking about how you're trying to serve underserved communities? Are you talking about like, oh, like I understand, when I go out and do this X, Y, and Z program, X, Y, and Z camp, that a number of the people are non-English speaking. So this has to be in multiple languages for us to cast this wide net when we look at this. When you talk about leadership, do you incorporate some of those DEI things? I think one of the things that was really pointed out to me that stuck years ago was, how we listen to, some of these responses. And I think the best example that I'll use, Josh told me one time was, it's the person that answers it. I have the opportunity to work with this group, oh, I get to, serve these people versus I have to work with this group. And it's probably, one way, while it sounds a lot better, like I'm not saying the person that says like, oh, I have to do this. It's not like when, we're growing up, oh my God, like I have to clean my room or I have to do this. It's probably not intended that way, but the person that talks about the opportunities to work with this or they get to do this comes to us as we kind of see that they already have that different lens that we're looking at. So we want to listen for all those equity competencies in every response, right? So we just don't want to have your basic equity question. Okay, check that box. And this was even something that as we were preparing for this, we were talking about 2 days ago about like, how we look at interviewing, right? Like in this first slide that I have up here, it's going to be a fair selection process. Everyone takes the, everyone has to climb this tree. Obviously, as we look at this, some people are going to be better at climbing the tree or getting to the top of the tree than others. I'll be honest, like how many of you guys, when you go through an interview process, you're like, okay, like, the interview process is going to be like, who can climb the tree or who can climb the tree the fastest? Well, if that's not a competency I need, why am I having everyone do that, right? Like maybe I just need leaves from the tree, and however you get me the leaves is however you get me the leaves. I really don't care. But maybe we should look at something like that rather than, looking at the intended responses, that we want versus the ones that we're conditioned to. And I'll be honest, when we first started talking about this, we had, with all of our executive management teams, really good conversations because I think we're programmed, for like interviewing, for hiring to do certain things or have certain expectations that, as we really started to have to unpack some of our biases and some of our, unknown cultural awareness, what that really meant. Like, it's like, oh, like we always talk about, end up tall, shake their hand firmly, look them in the eyes. What if people looking in the eyes is like something culturally that they just don't do, right? Is it fair that we should be marking them down for that? Or do we need to understand and have a greater appreciation, of everyone else's culture and their diversity and what they come to us with? Let's see here. Next thing we want to talk about, we looked about proclamations. So this is kind of too, like, for lack of a better term, like the low-hanging fruit for your organization to take the position, to create the spaces to be heard. It's a great kind of step to, progress through this journey. I know if you look at our Facebook page and our social media pages in the last couple of months, when we put out stuff for Pride Month or for Juneteenth, a lot of that now is accompanied with a proclamation. We also think that it's a really good step for, the board or for the elected officials, to kind of help starting to support this work. I think, we're really fortunate with the board that we have, and they're very supportive of all of the work that we've done. But, but to be talking honestly, I know in the past, at other agencies that I've worked or places that I've seen, a lot of times elected officials kind of stay neutral or kind of stay silent, in those things where, proclamation, easier way to step into it. Like, who doesn't want to support, Pride, or who doesn't want to support Juneteenth? Like, it's very easy to kind of, gather support for a lot of those things. Other things that we look to do, it's, equity in the staff reports. We look at to see like who is benefiting from this, who's potentially impacted from this, what are maybe some of the unintended consequences. So all that kind of goes into that policy development. And then like Josh talked about, like our harassment policies and our policies for reporting procedures. I'll be honest, like during this COVID time, I felt like we've updated 1,500 policies. It's probably a lot less, but we really did a deep dive into changing all of these. And I will even say, like, in prior to this, as I think it kind of also relates to like, some of the policies and the procedures, we've also done like, things from a more conscious effort. Like we've just recently redone our seating chart. Part of the things that we wanted to look to make sure that we do in a seating chart is, those people that, for cultural religious reasons, maybe they fast at certain times of the year. Okay, maybe their cubicle or their office shouldn't be right next to the kitchen. That we have that, cultural awareness, like, okay, like, some of those things might be happening. I'll be honest, like as an executive team, we've also had like a lot of really good conversations as to like, okay, what does it look like when, all of these people are kind of in, this wing, and this is the wing that, no one can really have access to except for like the people that are there, and you need to come in, yet everyone in this wing is an older white male, right? Like, like maybe that doesn't look, from a perspective standpoint, great. So a lot of the things that we've talked about, like for policies, procedures, all of those things we've just really looked at, did a deep dive in. I think we had like a lot of really good conversations that get us to where Josh is going to talk about now, and that's the action that we see internally.
All right, thank you, Mike. I know one of the questions we've gotten when we've presented this before is, obviously, as Mike mentioned, we have a really supportive board of directors, an elected board, and we're blessed to have such a supportive elected board, and not everybody has that same support. Or being a special district, we have pretty direct access to electeds. I just want to emphasize again, the proclamations are amazing in getting this work started. Because it sends a message to staff, and quite frankly, I have yet to see an elected official take a no vote on a proclamation recognizing something like Juneteenth. I think that it's a great way to do education in the community, and so if you're in a community that doesn't have electeds that are maybe as supportive in this space, I highly recommend really considering looking at use of proclamations as those holidays come up. And we're going to talk We're going to talk a little bit more about some of that. So what we've done here in seeing our DEI work in action internally, and a lot of this you'll see will play off that getting started material, what we learned from stakeholders, as well as kind of the policy and procedural updates we've made. We have a Parks and Recreation 3-year strategic plan and a 10-year master plan. As you will see here in the strategic plan, as one example, almost every goal area has some mention of equity, inclusion, or diversity. So, goal 1, meeting the needs of our growing community, recognizing that, we need to create responsive programs, parks, and facilities for Elk Grove's diverse and growing community. Goal 2 around strengthening parks and recreation facilities for future generations is this concept of generational equity, making sure that what we build today is sustainable over time for our children and our grandchildren to enjoy. The third goal is around fostering those partnerships and leveraging strengths and resources of other organizations. A really big focus, again, on engaging the community through volunteer work and partnerships, and making sure we have the right people in the room when those conversations and partnerships are occurring. And that fourth one is around allocation of staff resources based on operational practices and ensuring the long-term operation and maintainability of our service system. And there are elements there around fair pay for employees, and making that a goal for us in our strategic plan and initiative is to ensure that we are competitive with our pay, and that our pay practices aren't discriminatory, and that they're equitable, and that they're open and transparent. So you'll see, like in our strategic plan, we've woven the concepts of DEI into that work. We've really worked hard at creating an inclusive culture. As you'll see here, these are just some items, if you were to walk through our offices, that you would see hanging in offices and cubicles throughout the building. Messages like, "We welcome everyone and all are welcome and safe here." These are really simple things to do. And when we do care packages for new employees, as they start with the district, they receive posters. Some of these posters you see here are included in those welcome packages for employees. And so everybody starts day one with understanding this is a value that we have, and we encourage folks to express themselves in their workplaces. The other item that we have really incorporated is looking at all of the opportunities to recognize and celebrate our community and our staff. And as Mike mentioned, sometimes it's about celebrating, and sometimes it's about recognizing when we may have employees, for example, that are fasting, or when, and looking at we utilize a diversity calendar. And this is something that Cultures Connecting LLC, if you were to Google, Dr. Caprice Hollins publishes a diversity calendar every year, which is very good, including links to pages that explain some of the holidays that maybe you're not as familiar with, or cultural celebrations. And so these dates are chosen specifically, thinking about, might a student or staff member be absent as a result of this holiday or this day or this observance? Might a student or staff member be disengaged as a result of that day, such as hunger, negative association with particular day, date? Might a student, family, or staff member not be able to participate in an activity during that day as a result of the observance or holiday of that day? And then does that day provide an opportunity for a teachable moment regarding the ethnic or cultural diversity that might not otherwise be discussed? Particularly dates associated with the continued history of oppression, discrimination, or racism. So we take an opportunity to reflect on this calendar as we do planning. We think about proclamations. We think about, if we're going to do a proclamation, what are we doing internally with staff? Are we inviting speakers in that match that, match that observance? And then really simple things like, we're going to have a holiday potluck. What are all the holiday celebrations that others may be celebrating? And if you're going to do a holiday potluck, can we be certain that while we're doing that, we're not calling it a celebration, as there are some cultures in our community that don't participate in celebrations? And are we careful to make sure that we're not stacking that holiday potluck right over the top of a day in which some of our community members are fasting for their own beliefs? And so it's a little thing to do, to get out there and just look and see, and making sure that we completely understand all of our community, both internally, and this will lead to some of the external things you're going to see in a moment, but being able to really make sure that we're taking the opportunity to recognize all of the diversity of our employees in our community. And then the last piece is around bringing in training and those interactive opportunities internally. And I tried to take a stab here on the slide. This is a newly updated slide for the presentation, just to say, I think oftentimes we say, okay, we're going to do training, and everybody defaults to, you know, hiring and bias, and we need to eliminate bias in the hiring process is a lot of first steps. And it's not a bad step, but I think that it's important to recognize that when we talk about training, there's many opportunities for training. And I tried to break these down into, there's a foundation competency, just kind of a general understanding of what it means to be culturally competent, and that's an evolving and changing definition. And so staying relevant there is really important. But then thinking about, okay, bias and unpacking bias and white privilege and how bias impacts privilege in the workplace and stereotypes is good. What else is out there? And an awareness to things like institutional power and cultural clashes and sexism and microaggressions, and building an awareness for what these things are and how they impact our community and our employees. And then there's the gaining skills, thinking things about, how do you facilitate a listening session with the community? What does that look like? How do we lead organizational change in a multicultural world from an organizational perspective? What does it mean to use inclusive language, right? So there's an awareness, and then there's the skills that go with actually applying that awareness. And so I think that it's important to understand there's a lot of opportunities here. We've looked at things like part-time to full-time mentorships. We recently adopted an inclusive language guide. We have our DEI committee, but these are just some of the opportunities that exist. I also encourage folks, if you're not sure where to get started, bring in an outside trainer. Bring in somebody who can come in with a message. Sometimes hearing a message from somebody else outside your organization impacts the clarity in which the message can be received. And figure out how to get some of those aha moments. You know, I think we sit through a lot of trainings. Hopefully today you get a couple aha moments from what we're doing. But find something, and in this space too, I highly recommend participating with that trainer beforehand. You know, get online, watch there's so much training being done now by Zoom, but you know, get on and see a training that somebody is doing and make sure that it fits with where your organization is at. You know, for example, when we look at training, we're moving through this as a continuum. I think if we didn't start with the foundations of cultural competence and we didn't talk about bias, but we jumped right into some of these other topics, we would have missed opportunity because it's a journey. And I think you got to build upon what the skill set is that you have, and everybody's starting in a very different place when we enter into this work. So, you know, screen those trainers and find somebody who fits the messaging within your organization and will be compelling, and then help them, have them help you put together what that program looks like. I'm going to turn this back over to Mike to talk about how this work then translates to external.
Yeah, thanks. So, you know, so Josh and I talked a lot about like everything that we were doing internally. You know, so as we talked in the beginning, as we wanted this to not just be a task, but, you know, something that, you know, obviously we truly believe in, but more initiative objective based. You know, we look at, you know, okay, there's all the things that we've done with our staff to show our staff this is something that we believe in, that we want them to really start to believe in, to work here. We also want the community to be involved. So, you know, obviously we've talked a lot about jobs. So the first thing we'll talk about obviously is a job posting. You know, being Parks and Recreation in the past, we've probably, you know, done very minimal jobs, CPRS, NRPA, you know, maybe LinkedIn, the SACB, and like one or two other ones here and there. You know, but with this, we really expanded it. Now we have maybe about 30 locations, especially for the executive level and above, that we post to, like the Asian Career Network, the Black Career Network, the Greater Sacramento Urban League, iHispano, LinkedIn, Military to Career, you know, Women's Career Channel. So we want to cast as wide a net as possible, you know, as we're doing this. So it's kind of one of those things that, you know, like And we've talked about it. This is what we believe in. These are the actions that we've put behind all of those beliefs and all of those objectives that really show like, okay, we are committed to trying to reach out to everyone to see who is the best candidate to get to work here. Next, we want to look at our recreation programming, and I think, we want to incorporate DEI into all the programming. Here we have an example of our multicultural adventures of Cinderella. So this was, I'll be honest, a lot of this, as we've talked about empowering staff, has been staff's change that they've done. It wasn't really directed necessarily by myself or by Josh. I didn't tell my staff, hey, go back in and you produce, X number of multicultural events or make things more DEI relevant. They just went in and said like, okay, like this is something that we can do, right? Like this is something that before, it was probably just a white Cinderella for the Cinderella event. Now we want it to be more multicultural. I've talked in the beginning about, how diverse our community is. So what we wanted is we want, little girls or families, when they see us advertising, to see themselves in others, to see themselves into what we're producing, but, as we talked about, this is kind of like this large continuum. There's also other things that we need to look at, like, in doing this, we also need to put it in different languages, as I've talked about. We also want to look at to see at the end, we talked a little bit about data as who is taking this program, right? Like, is someone looking at this and being like, oh, like, this is a great way to introduce, diversity to, my child. We're, if we're an all white family, like, oh, I want my child to go to this. This is a great way to do that. And then we've advertised one way, but everyone or most everyone that attends, is from a different spectrum or is all white. Have we really hit our mark, right? Is that really something then that we need to really look at and see like, okay, like how do we make this a more diverse type of event? Let's see here. Other recreation programs we have. So we have a 9-hole golf course. With that, one of the things that we've been wanting to do for a long period of time is increase our female membership. But a lot of the things that we'd heard was, I don't feel comfortable golfing. I'd feel more comfortable with a female coach. I'd feel more comfortable around other females. So it was great. The manager that we have out there now, years ago, we were able to hire not one, but multiple female instructors and female coaches and female staff. They've started their own mentor league where it's females teaching females. So we've really tried to reach out and really kind of expand on a lot of the things that we are looking to do, that we're looking to better serve our community. Also with this, we look at other things like access to sports fields. I think this is a great one. And I'm going to give my sports staff all the credit for this in the world. So, for our sports fields, what happens is every year we allocate, all of our soccer fields out to all the soccer users and all the soccer clubs that pay a per player fee. We have a 4-turf complex field, granted basically 4 soccer fields, for lack of a better term. And those are used probably after 5 o'clock, Monday through Friday till 9, 10 o'clock at night, only by the users, or it used to be only by the users. And then the users would start coming to us and complaining of like, oh, well, we're getting a lot of people that are squatting on these fields, or, sometimes it's a dad and his family, sometimes, and they were using kind of dog whistle comments of like, oh, well, sometimes it's, there's a group of people that, they're playing loud music or doing all these other things. And I think their thought was, okay, we're just going to be more proactive in, kind of kicking these people off the field. The sports staff came to me and they're like, well, these are community members too. Why don't they have access to that field? And it took us to really sit down and be like, you know what? They should have access to that field. And what we did is we took, one field every night of the week offline, and that becomes the community use field. Just to go out and you can have your pop-up game. You can go out there as your family, throw a ball around, kick a ball around, whatever. Like, that field's not going to be reserved for One of our user groups is going to be reserved for the community, and is going to be reserved for those people that maybe they don't have the funding to pay for sports, right? And I think that also brings up another thing that we talk about, for the underserved communities. When we looked at, when I first took back over the CROF, or our Community Recreation Assistance Fund, or kind of our scholarship program, I had some aha moments and some, those aren't good moments. So we give out $150 to 50 families every year. One of our problems is we've given out the same $150 for a decade. Our fees have increased, but what we've done, hasn't correlated to increasing giving out that money to the families. And in further unpacking it and looking at it, we've always just said, like, okay, we're going to give them money so they can take a program. We've never once looked back until recently and said, like, you know what, if, this family or this single parent needs to sign up to take a swim lesson or a soccer class, maybe they don't have a towel, maybe they don't have a swimsuit or goggles, or if it's soccer, maybe they don't have a uniform or shorts or cleats or a soccer ball. So, as we look at now, one of the things that we're starting to do is a part of our scholarship program is also kind of incorporate getting someone, especially in the underserved communities, everything they need to take that. Let's see here. Next, so we've talked, and Josh and I have talked a lot about the community leadership standpoint, about using your organization to take a position. When a hate crime occurs in your community, do you put out something on social media? Do you put out a press release, opposing those actions? I'll be honest, we used to be silent, probably most government is, but we've chosen in this time, and as we've, further get down this continuum of our DEI, that we're not going to be silent. We're going to have a stance. I think, was it released a statement on social media following the murder of George Floyd, where it talks about the CSD is committed to removing systemic barriers to social justice and believes that everybody in our community should feel safe and connected. This was accompanied by a Desmond Tutu quote, where if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. So we wanted to show community leadership in that. We wanted our community to know that they should feel safe coming to our programs, to our facilities, to our parks, that this was going to be our stance. And I think it's also worth noting, like, this wasn't generated from the executive level. Our director of business and public affairs led this response. She empowered her team on the approach, and it was very clear that it was very much 100% on brand with everything else that we've done. And I think that type of empowering of staff is crucial. We've talked all along of, like, this is kind of like our DEI roadmap. This is where we started. This is where we've done. I talked in the beginning about the importance of getting the right people, getting them to buy in. I think that's, part-time, full-time at all levels. I think the next big thing is, how we empower our staff. I think a great example of that is one of our community centers. We have this huge blank wall. Like, years ago, I just told one of our staff, I'm like, hey, like, I want to do something with this wall. Like, let's make it more festive. Let's make it more engaging with the community. Sometimes we'll put stuff on our programs up there, but a lot of times we've used that to engage them with a lot of matters of, like, DEI. Like, I think for Pride Month, we had stickers and banners up there, and was like, tell us how you celebrate Pride. Tell us how you show Pride. Put something on, the ribbons here, and it was multi-colors. We talk about community engagement, kind of marketing and branding. I think other things that we've looked at doing, it's just kind of how we've tweaked or changed our message. Like, we used to probably just put a sign up that says, like, oh, we are closed on this day. We could used to say for Columbus Day, or we could just say we're just closed on this day. Instead, now we say, like, our facilities and programs will not be open, on this day in observance of Indigenous Peoples Day. And then we follow that with on social media by letting the public know on social media that we're closed that day. But we also, inform honoring the day and giving information on it as well. So I know Josh had talked about the diversity calendar for programs, campaigns, events. As you look at here, I think it's just awesome to see, how our staff have really bought into this, without us telling them to. I talked about, like the prompt of the Pride is Freedom and everything else they've done. We've had other staff, that have given and talked about an empowering message for International Women's Day that we've done on social media, stuff that we've done for Juneteenth. So a lot of the stuff, that we're doing, as you can kind of see here on social media, all staff driven, right? All from, them being empowered to do so.
Okay, so we have a quick little 30-second or so video, and I think that, and then a quick recap. I know we're coming up on 11. So I want to give, and Mike just did as well, but I want to give more credit to our employees. And so it's fantastic as an organizational leader. We're often asked to speak on this topic, or I get calls from city managers up and down the West Coast asking us about our work. But really, what we did is we looked at data, we got started, we made some policies, stated this as a value, and our employees have really taken this work and ran with it. And the ability for our management team to empower our line staff to do that, I think, is really what has put us in the position that we're in. And so this video, I think I'm going to be able to play, features our very own Tracy Ferris, our chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And so here we go.
We welcome all races and ethnicities.
We welcome all religions.
We welcome all countries of origin.
We welcome all gender identities.
We welcome all abilities.
We welcome all sexual orientations.
We welcome all spoken languages.
And we welcome all ages.
We welcome everyone.
You are safe here.
So I share that as one video that we've used in marketing materials. We've used it internally and externally. And again, I think it's just a great example of, I didn't ask for that video. I didn't ask for us to do that. Nobody directed staff to put that together. But we've got a great team working through our DEI committee with the full support of management, and they're making some incredible things happen. And I think from an organizational perspective, if you can create the culture, use proclamations, get your electeds on board, create that culture around policy and procedure, state equity, diversity, and inclusion as organizational values, and turn your folks loose to make it come together. That's been our secret to success here, and I'm really proud of the work that our team has done. So with that, quick to recap. Number one, understand that context, not hard, unfortunately, in times that we're in now, to look around and see a lot of context of why this is such important work. Second, research, survey, compile your data, develop your statement, your commitment, your goals, whatever you want to, however strong you want to come on to valuing this work and pushing that organizationally. Develop those policies and procedures, and think about your harassment policy and use your proclamations. Focus on that internal culture, make the DEI work you're doing, and equity and inclusion in particular, make it a stated competency for the health and diversity of your community and your workforce. And then proactively engage those external community and think about community-based action. When we put out something, are we calling folks to action? Are we inviting the community to engage with us in a positive way? So that concludes the presentation for today. I think we have about 5 minutes. We're happy to answer any questions, or if you had anything that your organization is doing that you think we should consider. We're good parks folks. We love to hear what everybody else is doing and copy it. So with that, if there's any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you so much, Joshua and Mike. There was one comment in the chat from Deborah Hernandez, and she asked, were there any backlash from, I think, city partners, example, police department, on the statements or religious groups?
We did not have, we didn't have a backlash, I don't think, on any statements. We try really hard to make sure when we make statements, we're making statements like, there's a commitment to, or like with Pride in particular, we flew a Pride flag here at our admin building, and I'd say we got a little bit, the first year we did that, we caught a little bit of question from some folks, but, in our response has been around that's an act of inclusion. That's us showing that we want to welcome everyone. We try hard to make sure that we're not taking a position that's exclusive. And so our response has really been, no, this is about inclusion. And what I will say again is we're a public service agency as well with our fire and ambulance services, but our fire department has engaged in this work, and they've engaged in a little bit different. I think we've acknowledged that our parks department is about reaching out to community and pulling people in, and that our fire department, if they've done their job well, they'll never see anybody in our community. And so the messaging has been a little bit different, and as we've implemented there in fire, but what we've really done over there is we focused on, here's why this is important for you to be the best you can be at your job. Understanding cultural competency makes you a better firefighter, paramedic. It provides better patient care. And so we've taken a little bit different position in our implementation with fire, but we haven't had anything but public support for the work that we're doing in this space.
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing to that, I also think whenever we put out this type of messaging, whether it's proclamations or anything else, we also let both the city and the school district, the other two large municipal governments in town, we also kind of try to either partner with them, put out a joint statement. When we developed our DEI inclusive language guide, I know we sent it over to both of them. I know the school district is looking to do something similar and copying it. So the goal isn't for us, I guess, to just be out leading from the front. Is also we want to take the other community partners and especially the municipal government partners with us.
Thank you. And then there was, from earlier, a few people asked if you would be able to share the survey that you send to all your city employees.
Yeah, what we can do is I will post, I'll post contact information here in the chat. And if anybody would like that survey, we actually published it as part of a staff report that went to our board of directors. I'm happy to have staff forward that survey to anyone who's interested. What I will say in the survey, and from a place of a little bit of vulnerability, our survey results generally came back very good in our workplace survey. But we also recognize that a workplace survey for us as an organization that has a fire department that is primarily white men, that just having good survey results come back on a workplace survey that says everything is great wasn't a deep enough dive to really understanding what the dynamic is within our organization, right? So we really had to go in and really look at the data by responses and by department and really kind of pull it away. And so we did use a consultant, third party, who put together that survey. And when they came back and said, you guys are doing great, we had to kind of step back and say, we appreciate that, but who was surveyed? Who makes up our organization that thinks we're doing great? And then let's peel that layer away a little bit and see where it is, have some space to improve. And so I'm happy to share the survey, but that's kind of the disclaimer on the survey results themselves. And so we didn't take that survey as, yes, we're awesome. We took that as, yes, there's a lot of white men in this organization who think it's great, and we need attention to everyone else who's working here who and value their as we get this. With Cultures Connecting LLC is, in my opinion, the best trainer I have ever had in this space.
Hands down.
Hands down. She's based out of the Spokane, Seattle area. She is a professor, and she has had a very unique experience growing up and then teaching this work. And so Cultures Connecting LLC, she is the one who publishes the diversity calendar every year, which is a great resource, but she also has some fantastic trainings. I think she's actually doing a TED Talk in Seattle. I just saw an advertisement for it this morning come across my email. So I think that there's, if you wanted to kind of preview, that might be a good opportunity to preview what she does, but definitely Cultures Connecting LLC. I would say she's my role model and hero as we engage in this space, and is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. There was one more question if you are available to stay on a little bit later. Or they can email you, but the question was, do you conduct the workplace survey on an ongoing basis to see if their perception has changed?
Yeah, we've conducted additional workplace surveys. We didn't conduct the exact same survey, but we did incorporate some of those same questions into the ongoing workplace surveys. Right now, workplace surveys, as I'm sure you're all experiencing, we did do one during COVID, and the results were different than they had been previously. Not necessarily in a bad way, but in a sense of morale and connection to others and feeling like there's opportunity. And so we are taking that to heart. And I think the biggest thing there was the workplace survey this last time thought that executives weren't accessible enough to employees. And so we're working really hard to be more accessible, which is very hard, of course, during COVID, and reasonable, I think, for our employees to feel that way. So I think, we have continued to do that. We have every intention of doing another good, robust workplace culture survey to try to dive a little bit deeper in that space. And we've committed to doing regular and ongoing updates with our board. So, all right, I think that's going to conclude our time. Is that right, Mary Elise?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of the work that you've done. It was very uplifting. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to email Joshua. He put his email in the chat. And thanks for joining the session.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great day.